All right. Well, we're going to assume that people are joining and watching us. Welcome, everyone. I am Lola Elfman. I am the founder and CEO of Develop Well. We're a coaching and consulting practice focused on fun things like management and leadership. And I get to be the fun host and moderator of this great panel today. I'm going to let my co-panelists introduce themselves in a minute, and they're going to introduce themselves with their name, their pronouns, their organization, and a fun fact about themselves. So I'll start. I am Lola Elfman. I use the she, her pronouns. I'm from Develop Well. The fun fact is that yesterday I got a pat down at my coffee shop because none other than First Lady Dr. Jill Biden was just having a casual breakfast, and it was really cool. And I was like, hee. Anyway, that's my fun fact. So I'm going to pass to my right, which is Ruby. Go ahead, Ruby.
Hi, everyone. What a fun fact, Lola. So my name is Ruby. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am the training director at Act Blue. And a fun fact about me is before I got into politics, I was an extra in movies. So if you've ever seen the movie Here Comes the Boom, a classic of its times, I am in the trailer for that. So catch me in a pink dress in the movie Here Comes the Boom. My fun fact. And I will pass it to Justin.
Wow, good afternoon, everyone. I'm like now struggling, like, man, I have to rethink my fun fact by the time I get my name and pronouns out. My name is Justin Jenkins, pronouns he, him. I'm deputy campaign manager for Mark Kelly for Senate. My fun fact, I'm just going to go with my tried and true, is that I have 22 screws and two 12-inch rods in my spine. And post leaving the surgery where I received them, I told my little brother that I was now Wolverine and he had to watch out. And with that, I'll coach it to Melinda.
You guys are taking up like the two spaces I usually occupy with my fun facts, which are weird pop culture appearances and medical mishaps. But yeah, I'm Melinda Freevert. I use she, her pronouns, and I will go with the fun fact that has not been occupied yet, which is pets. You can find photos of my cat on Instagram under the hashtag CommieCats. I adopted her from some friends. Her name is Emma Goldman, and her brother's names were Lenin Trotsky and Gompers. So we're repping the socialist hard in this household. Though for being named after a communist, she really likes like bougie food and treats. So not making bougie Emma Goldman very proud.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining. So one of the conversations that we got to have, the four of us last week, was just about like management in general. What is it like to be a manager? What do we get into? We sort of had a conversation. We're like, okay, let's have this conversation again with everybody else. So here's what's kind of tricky about this is that like we can't see you. We can't actually see how many people there are here or your name. So if you want to drop into the chat, just who you are, say hello, where you're from, that would be awesome. As we go through, all of us will explain a little bit more about like who we manage, how long we're doing, all sort of details like that. But we'd love to hear from anyone watching right now, just a little hello, who you are, what management stuff. We are going to have a little discussion with us. We have some questions, some conversations with each other, and then we're going to open up to Q&A. Q&A is obviously going to be questions in the chat, and we'll answer and go for that for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have a little closing here. So that's how we'll run, but I'll be watching the chat going through all of this. Sound good? So yeah, love some hellos. We've got Noah from Pittsburgh, Travis from DC. Hey. Yeah, any other shout outs? Any other hellos? I'd love to hear them. Anyone on the West Coast just waking up, having a coffee right now? Maybe. All right. Well, so one of the things that we talked about was just sort of actually getting clear about like, what does being a manager mean? And what do we see as like, okay, let's get clear on like, what does a manager do? What are we responsible for? And then how do we do that well? And so we're just going to start out kind of there. Like Ruby, Justin, Melinda, I'd love to hear from you all just what you think about like what do you see managers doing? What do you think managers should be doing? And what do you love about managing people? Who wants to kick it off?
Sure. I mean, I can start.
Yeah.
I think so. Again, Ruby from Act Blue. I think managing is one of the hardest jobs you could have. And it's not even your regular job of the work that you're doing, it is just an all encompassing thing that you do. And so I want to start with that. I think it is the hardest thing in the world because it's so much about being a leader. And when I was thinking about what management means to me, I thought about all of the kind of great leaders of my life. And that went like ranged from my mom to Mathoni Wambu Kral, who was my, VP at Emily's List. Like it ranged kind of a space of folks. And kind of the one thing that I thought that all of those folks had in common is that they were there for me. They were reliable and they helped me to grow in a way that I probably wouldn't have by myself. So that's what I think of when I think of being a manager and being a leader, is being there for your people, being reliable, and helping folks to grow in ways they might not have without your leadership. So.
Oh, I love that. Justin, I saw you nodding a little bit there. What do you think? What was that?
I think, I think the biggest piece is building that camaraderie for a team at large. I know that we're going to talk about quotes later, so I got to save it in my back pocket. But particularly understanding how you are controlling and influencing the communication structures around you. So much of what shapes our relationships in our both personal and professional lives comes down to how we communicate to people, what we're communicating to them, and what it says about how we view them. And so at a manager level, not only are you managing your communication to your team, but you're also trying to build and set norms and expectations and create spaces where people can collaborate and communicate with each other in really healthy and productive ways. And so it requires a lot of energy. To Ruby's point, it is one of the hardest jobs you can do, to have to sit on top of that and be constantly aware of what's happening, not just from the day-to-day management of tasks that need to be done, but to like the personal and professional development of your team. I think building that culture is so important.
Absolutely. Yeah, the camaraderie, I think, is a key thing. We were just talking about before we hopped on Ruby's team at Act Blue and like how much it's grown. It's like that camaraderie, having to build it first in person and now over the last 18 months remotely, like that's adding a whole new layer. Melinda, I know you're helping grow a smaller, newer team. What does management look like for you?
So Ruby, you mentioned leadership, and I think for me, what I have many catchphrases that have become a part of like my life over the last year, and I should probably just like get them all tattooed at some point, but none of them are like good or fun tattoos. But one is management and leadership are different things. And I think particularly thinking about an organization that grows, like it really is important for the role of a manager and the role of a leader to get teased out, because there are so many people. Like, to me, Ruby and Justin, you both talked about like people and team building a lot, and that is like one thing that can be, if you have a staff of 30 people, like that's a whole job, just trying to create like connection and team building amongst a large group of folks. That doesn't even get into like, what is the future of this organization or this business or this campaign, and like what's the direction we're all headed into. And I've definitely, like, reflecting on my career over the last 11 years, I've almost always worked in places where there was a dual role, where somebody was the leader and thinking about the big picture and where are we all headed, and somebody else was like overseeing the shop and how people were doing day to day, how are people growing, what's the vibe? Are we taking care of people? How are folks interacting with each other? But yeah, like there's a lot. And so being able to separate those two things, because it's a lot for one person to do, unless you are like, a small single person or like less than 10 staff shop. That's a lot to take on.
Absolutely.
Well, I think another thing too, and I know we talked about this when we were discussing how we wanted to broach this topic, is that I think it's really important and honest, particularly for managers hiring and building managers, right? Is that not everyone's cut out to be a manager. There are some people who just don't have the skills necessary and require more time and development. I think particularly for me, coming out of electoral politics, it's really easy for us to think that like someone's finished one cycle, so they should go into the next title bump, the next rung, into their next job. But that's not always the case. There's sometimes that people need further development before they are able to actually manage and lead their team and whatever their responsibilities are. And I think it's really important that in the progressive space, we have that conversation, because I think systematically we promote people who aren't ready for the next role, particularly when it's tied to management. And what it does is it hurts your ultimate goals as an organization, but it also sets your staff up for failure. We want to see them succeed. We want to see them develop over time. And if we're putting them in a job where they're going to fail, it makes it that much harder for them to move into their future opportunities.
Absolutely. Thank you. And one of the things that we talked about also in that is like helping to make sure that there's room for people to grow that isn't just through lines of management, right? So that people can grow in their career, they can become more senior leaders, but it's not reliant on managing other people, because some people are excellent managers and it is a skill that can be taught and improved, but some people aren't, and that's an okay thing. And if we just like name it, we're an okay thing. This is a good point, especially going to our next topic, to just remind folks, and my host failure on saying, this is a confidential space, so take the lessons, but leave the details of the stories, right? So no one's going to say like super detailed confidential things, but just, take the lessons, take the learnings, leave the stories. And the reason I say this is that we were talking quite a lot in our prep for this about hard conversations and what makes things hard about them, right? And one of the top things that came up was feedback. So I'm going to pass to you all and just say, like, when we talk about hard conversations and what you've been thinking about, like, what do you find hard about these conversations and how do you navigate that? And I'm sure folks in the chat, which by the way, our chat just all of a sudden blew up and now I see everybody's things. Love to hear from some of you listening about what you find about what is hard about conversations. What's a hard conversation for you to have? And maybe we'll be touching on it. We have a couple here. So Justin, I'm going to hop to you first.
I think that I'm going to say it. I'm going to own my truth. I'm a Leo. I like the validation of being liked by other people. And sometimes as a manager, you feel like you have to deliver things or feedback to someone and they're not going to like it or like you because of it. And so I think that, A, that's hard and that's difficult. No one wants to deliver feedback that they don't feel is going to be well received. But I think that there's two things that really have helped me as a manager in approaching that. Is one is setting expectations very clearly and concisely up front. It's much easier to deliver feedback when someone hasn't met a goal, when you've already told them what the goal is and they know what it was. You've asked them to repeat it back to you to demonstrate a clear understanding of that goal. And the second piece is the relationship building, right? Is like if you have done the work of creating the team and feedback norms and communication channels where feedback is viewed as an opportunity for growth, in achieving larger personal goals, I think it's much easier to have those conversations. Be like, hey, remember how we had this conversation about how you wanted to accomplish X by the end of this cycle or this quarter or this year? This is the performance on X object, knowing that we're moving towards that. Here's some suggested feedback I have around that, right? Really basing it in the success of not just the operation, but of the individual, I think can really help create an easier way to have harder conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I would completely agree with that, Justin, is to set those expectations, then takes kind of the how maybe shitty it feels to get feedback when you have like, okay, we set these expectations. These were the things we expected. These are the things that didn't happen. And it's less like, hey, you did a bad job or like you aren't doing a good job. It's like, these are the things we need to move forward on. And I think the the thing for like the hard conversations where the hardness comes for me, I'm not a Leo, but I also want to be liked. And I think that might just be like an all around, like, I'm not sure if I've ever met anyone that was like, you know what I love? Conflict. Like, you know what I love? Hard conversation. And it is something that feels so like, I would rather avoid it, or I would rather just not be part of the situation. I just don't want to deal with it because this person that I work with every single day, 8 hours a day for years, is now a person that I need to deliver, hard news to or feedback about performance. And that's the thing that gets me, is like taking the kind of personal out of it, and like, this is work, these are things that need to get done, these were things that were expected, these were things that weren't done, now let's figure out a way to get them done. And so taking out the kind of personalness of it has been something I've been working on with the tough part, because thinking about why it's tough, I think it's because it's the like human being side of it. Like, I'm not trying to make you feel shitty, I don't want you to feel, it's that part of it that's tough for me.
Absolutely. Melinda, what do you think?
Oh, there are a lot of things that make things hard. Well, I know when we talked about previously, right, there's also all of the outside stuff that is happening. We are a year and a half into a pandemic, and like, my emotional capacity is incredibly low. Like, I'm still mostly just like trying to get through the day and make sure that my loved ones are okay. Like, that's still like not as secure as it used to be. It's definitely a lot better than it was a year ago when we were meeting at Netroots. But like, people are still dealing with that. People are dealing with a ton of trauma around that. There were the uprisings last year, and we are still continuing to have really important ongoing conversations and work that is done around the white supremacy that underlies the foundations of this country, and does harm every single day. And like, all of that is hard. Like, we are not operating as managers in a vacuum, and I don't know if it's become more intense in the last couple of years because of everything, or if I have been sheltered by my own privilege over the last 10 years of work. But yeah, there's also a lot happening outside that I think we want to be good people and understand the context that our staff are showing up in, because they're people. They're not just showing up as automatons to work every day to like punch the clock, do the thing on the assembly line, punch out, like go home. They are bringing their full selves, and we need them to bring their full selves. And so sometimes that makes those conversations hard, because we are navigating trauma, we are navigating privilege, we're navigating a lot of hard things that like this country has avoided for a really long time, and we don't have really good models of how to handle those things.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, go on, Justin. Sorry.
Well, to add on that, I think, particularly, I remember last year, having conversations about Black Lives Matter and police brutality, creating spaces where you can have those conversations when it has to do with identity, and when the identity between the manager and those being managed are on different sides of that, and other identities, right? And I think having built not just spaces where you can have those conversations, but build habitual practices where you've showed where you are willing to engage in those conversations in a safe and productive way, where you're not burdening your team with those conversations, but you are appropriately addressing them. I think, because like, that's a big thing, right? Particularly if you are, a non-white manager managing a Black staffer who you're trying to engage on the topic of racism, like, how are you making this their burden to engage in this conversation? Or are you creating a space where they feel like they can engage, they want to engage, and they feel like it's productive to the work environment?
Absolutely. And I want to lift up a comment that I see here from Robin Swirling. Hi, Robin, about the willingness to have hard conversations and what happens. I'll add a word here, which is avoiding them. And when we avoid them, what's the cost of avoiding them, and what's actually being created and fostered in that culture, and becoming part of your workplace systems, right? It's like, oh, there's a problem. We don't talk about that, though. We don't address things. And that spirals in a really big way. And so that piece of like having the hard conversation and figuring out for ourselves, what's hard about this for me? What's going to be hard about it for them and for other people if we have the conversation versus not having the conversation? So it's going to kind of be hard probably all around. So how do we work through it to have the hard but productive and important conversation, right? So I think that that's hopefully something that is people are starting to hear and work through. I'd love to hear from folks about what is and this is putting you all on the spot because I just thought of this one, we didn't think about it before, but I would love to hear about a hard conversation you've had that maybe just a hard conversation you have had. You don't have to use specifics, but like, what did you do to get through it? Maybe it didn't go as well as you'd hoped, and maybe it did. And I'll name one. I'll start so you all can think for a second. So we just on our team developed, well, we have a small but growing team. And in the last couple of weeks, I had a little surgery, and everyone was like, oh, you're going to be up and back in like 48 hours. And it was not. And a hard conversation I had to have because I was seeing it impacting me. My team had to pick up all the slack for my work. Was I had to say, I can't do 2 trainings that were partners. One is here at Netroots. I was supposed to do another one, and I had to email Mary Rickles and be like, I'm sorry, Mary. And the other was with someone else. And that was hard for a lot of other people. It impacted them and it impacted me, but it was better for my health and well-being, and it was better for everyone else to not have me like basically out of it and not show up the way that I needed to. And that was boundary setting, and it was not comfortable. I didn't want to say no. That's not my style. I had committed. I wanted to see it through, but everyone was okay with it. And I was like, oh, okay, I can have that hard. That was hard for me. It wasn't actually hard for anybody else. It's like, oh, okay, big learning. So I don't know. That's mine. That's my confession. I don't know. Anyone else?
Yeah, I had it's something similar to that, but it was June of last year. And I'm Kenyan from the Kikuyu tribe, and I'm also white. So I'm half and half. And so last year I had this this time of my life when I had never had to really think about, am I white or am I Black? Like I don't think I've ever asked myself that question before last year, when there were specific things for white people and specific things for Black people, and you had to pick between them. So I was like, I don't know, like having a little bit of a crisis situation within myself. But then it's also showing up to work as a manager of people who are both white and Black and other races. And so it was having a conversation with those folks that I mean, what you were saying, it had to kind of draw a boundary between, this is work and we aren't family, we aren't like best friends, so we're not going to have a certain type of conversation, but we are colleagues, we work at the same place, this is all happening in the world around us, so we need to have some kind of conversation about who's taking time off, what work we're getting off our plates, because it was affecting all of us in such different ways. And I think that was a time maybe the words could have been better that I said, but I think having that conversation during that time of like, this is happening, let's figure out how to get stuff off our plates and deal with it. I think that was a hard conversation, but a necessary one for everyone to get through last year.
Yeah, thank you, Ruby.
I think, I think Ruby also touched upon something that's like really important, particularly in the progressive space. And I think we've seen some dialogue about this, in particular about the rhetoric we use about calling people in the workplace a family, to create a narrative where we want our staff to give more and sacrifice more to the organization, but aren't willing to have those hard conversations in return. Like, that's the thing, right? Is that you can't have it both ways. You can't be a family and not have real talk at the dinner table. That's not how it works. And so if you want to be a professional environment, you need to both be willing to have some tough conversations, but you need to do them in the right way and draw certain boundaries. I also think it's important as managers, when we have these harder conversations, to draw boundaries for ourselves, right? Like my experience that I was thinking of was back when I worked at Starbucks. I was a barista. And I think that management experience from the retail space is so important too. And you should rely on that when you're managing in your whatever career you're doing now. I had a barista that I was managing on my team who just straight up was not doing what I had asked. They basically left the cafe on a break and just like did not come back for a long time. And I had asked them multiple times to come back to work to get the job done so we as a team could finish our shift and end the day, and they didn't. And the person I was managing told me like, oh, I thought it was fine, like I thought we were cool. And I was like, here's the thing, I asked you to come back because A, that's your job, you're like on clock, you need to be working. B, when I go to you in front of the rest of the team and ask you to come back to work and you say no, it completely disrupts the structure we've built here, that it doesn't matter what I have to say. Now no one has to meet that standard. And it wasn't about my self-importance in that moment. It was about also setting the boundaries that like that was just disrespectful, right? Like I was just like, all I'm asking you to just do the job you clocked in for. And it was really hard for me as a manager to stand up for myself, right? Because like sometimes you have someone that you are managing who does not want to be managed. That's a whole other kind of hard conversation. But setting the boundary for yourself that like doesn't matter if it's coming from above you, beneath you, or from the lateral to you, like you deserve to be respected in the workplace, and taking the time to communicate in the right way. It can be hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Justin. And that's one of the things that we all named was sort of one of the manager truths, right? Which was like boundary setting is key. And boundary setting, I'm seeing some like conversation in the chat here around what those boundary setting limits are and when they're hard, and some of the expectations, especially of being in the progressive movement, of being in nonprofits, of sort of like putting the cause above all of us. But what do we know about that? Which is like, if we self-sacrifice, we're not going to be here for a long time. And that was a theme of all of we were talking about, of how do we really make this sustainable, and how are we as managers, if that's part of our responsibility, to help ensure that people are here for the long term and can be here, and do what they need, and also grow and develop people in meaningful ways so that we don't lose people, if people feel expendable. So I'd love to like, let's shift into that. So like, what are some of the things that we've been doing or been trying to do, maybe successfully, not successfully, to make this more sustainable and workable? We had some fun ideas in there. Ruby, I might throw to you if you have some.
Yeah. So this is say that to me again. How to build a more sustainable team that can grow together.
Yeah. And boundaries are part of that, right? Saying yes intentionally and no intentionally.
And I think this is such a kind of pivotal moment for me as I'm growing my team. And this will be kind of a brand new team and a brand new structure. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about what does it mean to come out the gate hot with good team culture, like build a delicious team culture, how to set those boundaries with the team, how to set up what the current structure is, whose decision makers, whose feedback is needed. Like, I'm thinking about all of these things, and honestly working through it, it feels like I'm building, my own organization. Because when you're a team, kind of within a team, you sure, there's culture around you, but you also build it from the top down, and how you act and how you come to work and how you show up and how you are there for others is how other folks usually will act when they're on the team. So I think the things that I want to be really clear with my team about in order to build that kind of from the start is setting those expectations out front, like Justin, what you were talking about, and not expectations for even hard things, expectations for vacations, expectations for like, if you're having a hard day, tell me so you can take some time away from work. I want to set that up in the beginning. And I think the other thing that makes work sustainable, at least for me, that I would like to have a conversation with my team about, is that we're all human beings and we hang out for 8 hours a day. And I know I said that before, but I think about that all the time, is I hang out with people at work more than I hang out with anyone else, like in my life. And so building a relationship that both has a boundary between like, yeah, we're not family, but we are human beings that hang out for 8 hours a day. And like, that is something. Like that is something. So we need to build a relationship where we all understand that we are people with different personalities that have different needs. And I think setting that up from the beginning, that that's important to me as a manager, that's important to the team, is going to be really critical, and folks feeling valued, that they can show up as their full authentic selves. And I working on showing that myself to my staff is also something that I'm really interested in doing when I bring on these folks.
That's awesome.
I on the sustainability piece, I liked a lot of what Ruby had to say. Last year, one of the things I imposed on my team, and I say imposed because I kind of forced them into it, but they got bought in, was we actually built out, because it was our first time as a team working remotely, right in the pandemic, a sustainability tracker. And what we did is I tasked my team with identifying 5 metrics of physical and mental health that they felt comfortable sharing with the team. And we put them into a tracker, and we had a nightly checkout where they would have to fill it out and update the team on whether they hit their daily goals. And by leading our checkout call with that, what I was communicating to them was that I prioritized their well-being before the task they had at hand. It created a culture of wanting to support each other and reaching our personal goals. And it also created an opportunity for me as a manager when it came to project management to know, like, hey, I've noticed that one of your goals is being able to step away and have lunch without your phone once a day, and you haven't been able to do that for 3 days. What can I take off your plate to help you hit your personal goals? Right? It's a great way to see through another lens your team's capacity and what they're actually able to accomplish. And I think that that another big piece of that is modeling. Right? Like, we can set expectations and communicate goals, but if we as managers are not modeling those same sustainability goals, they won't take them seriously, right? And they think that we're holding them to a different standard than ourselves. And that's not necessarily what we want to create. And I think that there was a comment from Doug I saw about the conversation of asking for what you need. That's a great tool and place to do that, right? To say that, like, hey, for me to be happy in this workplace and be successful, I need to be able to have my hour a week where I can go to see my therapist. I need to be able to have 30 minutes outside breathing fresh air. And so creating a space and a norm for your team to communicate that to you, and you supporting them get those things, is really a great way to build that team culture, to build that relationship that Ruby's talking about, but also recognize the humanity of the job.
100%. Thanks, Justin. Melinda, do you want to add in there?
Well, Ruby and Justin are really smart and have basically said it all the time already. So I don't know if I'd be adding much, but yeah, I think modeling it is really important. We've talked about that a lot on leadership teams I've been on, right? And holding each other as leaders accountable, because like I 100% get being a manager and showing and being like, I don't want my absence to be a burden on my team. But then when you show up or answer emails on vacation, then everybody assumes that's the norm, no matter how much you say it's different. So modeling that be as much as possible. And I'll say, like, I have found time tracking to be really helpful. We started doing that this year with our team. And so being able to see, like, oh, these people are like, or this person is like consistently tracking over 40 hours a week. They are on the verge of burnout, if not already there, right? Just being able to, like Justin said with his tracker, right? Like putting some numbers to it. So actually for me, as someone who comes from digital, like being able to dataify it and see it in a spreadsheet is actually really helpful for understanding how close or far we are from where we want to be. Oh, the other thing I was going to say that I like what Justin said was I think helping folks operationalize some of this stuff, right? It's really easy to be like, hey, you seem to be like really stressed out. Can you make sure you take lunch this week? But if people feel like they can't step away, or there really is too much on their plate to step away, and you as a manager don't actively get engaged in helping them figure out how to solve that, then like it's an unfunded mandate. And you're just giving people one more thing to do with no support to do it.
1,000,000%. And so we're going to go into Q&A right now, and I grabbed some of the questions I saw in the chat. So if you have a question for us, feel free to add it in there, and I'll sort of consolidate on what some of the things are that we're getting. But one thing I'll say, just to bounce off of what Melinda just said, and to Nathalie, what you just said, you asked about how do you manage someone that isn't the best at meeting deadlines. One of those two things are actually really clear. It's like, rather than being really broad and general, like you need to do this work, this is important. You can say it's important, but actually getting as specific and clear as possible about what does success look like. When is something due? What does the draft look like? What are the final details? When are you going to check in about it? And that may be, hey, when are you taking lunch? Have you blocked it on your calendar, right? Do you want to tell me when you're going, right? Like finding a way is the same thing as drafting an email or a press release and having an agreed upon time when you're going to look at it and give feedback on it. It may seem like they're really different things, but actually they're kind of exactly the same. You're using the same tools. So one of the first questions we're going to grab, and I see the ones here, is one from Alex. And Alex asked in the chat, can you talk a bit about managing up and the difficult conversations that come with communicating to leadership and representing your team well? And so this is, I think people feel this a lot. When you're a manager, you're somewhere in the middle, right? Between a whole set of expectations. And I like to think of the ecosystem of, yep, there's your boss and your boss's boss and the people above you. There's the folks that you're managing below you. Then there's all of your peers, your partners, internal and external, who you're navigating. And so talk about hard or difficult conversations. Like it may shift based on who you're talking to. So I'd love to hear from you all. I see Justin, I'm thinking of you right now. And Ruby, I saw you nod too, and you're doing lots of trainings with folks and all sorts of organizations. Yeah.
I think the big thing with having conversations upward and upwards management, we talked about earlier, when you want to have a course correction conversation, it's really helpful to have outlined what the expectations and goals are to the people that you manage. Sometimes to have upwards management conversations, you need to ask them what the goals and expectations are up front if they're not already providing those. It's really important that when people give you information or make a request for you, that you communicate your questions. I think that we get scared that asking for help or that asking for clarification communicates that we're not good at our jobs, and that's a fallacy. That's not true. Knowing to ask questions when they are appropriate is actually a very important skill in any professional setting. And so particularly, again, the person who you might be managed by, that is another relationship. And so the more questions you ask, the more specific and the more you can over communicate on the front end of that relationship and really get a sense of their priorities, their goals, and their communication styles, you can really leverage that information to not only have a good working relationship there, but then particularly when you want to represent your team and take concerns from your team to them, you know how to approach it, right? I mean, the politics of working in politics is understanding who you're talking to and what your expected outcome is. What do you actually want to get out of this conversation? If you're just relaying information, great, relay it. But if you want to get somewhere, you need to think tactically about it, right? Like, outline your goal, take some time. And one of the biggest pieces of advice I'd say outside of that, if you're ever going to work into a hard conversation, it's okay to consult someone else on your approach, some trusted advisor, some mentor, someone else in the organization. Now, be smart about the information you share and what their role in the situation is. You don't want to create some weird power imbalance by debriefing private information, but it's okay to ask for help. Like, the smartest people I know don't just work off of what they know, they work off and learn from the mistakes of others. And that's what we should all aspire to do.
Oh, Justin, that was all the tea. That was all the tea you need to know about working in politics. I think the only thing I could add to that, it's probably within there somewhere, is the most successful managing up conversations I've had is when I've brought up, hey, this is a problem. Here's a suggested solution that we have for this. Or like, hey, here's a problem. We worked with the staff. They told me what they think about it, what their solution would be. Here's what we're thinking. And like, yeah, it might not be taken, but you're coming with a listen. This is something that's not working so well, and here's a way to work it better. And those are the most successful conversations I've had, because then you're not leaving your manager with like, here's a heap of problems, like, good luck, manager, have fun dealing with that. It's like, here's a heap of problems, but the people on the ground that are actually experiencing it or going through these policies or whatever they are have proposed solutions for them. So those are the most successful times I've ever done that.
Awesome. So let's jump to something real quick here, which is Zoom fatigue, because we're all feeling it. So Molly, thank you for that question in there, and the importance of check-ins versus Zoom fatigue, and how do you balance these things, and how have you gotten creative at doing this? If you have you found other ways to check in with folks?
I can just pop in one more time. It'll be super quick. I had one day when my computer didn't work. My computer, like, it broke down, the charger wouldn't work. So I had to spend all day on my phone, which at first thought I was like, oh, this is going to be so annoying. But then as the day went on, my headache was gone. I was looking out the window, like I was only looking at this tiny little screen. I had a couple of my check-ins were just phone calls with people. And I think to experience not being on Zoom all day during a workday was kind of crucial for me to understand, like, maybe having a little bit of time as just a phone call is nice. And so I think something that I'm trying to do is, if it's like a personal check-in or if it's like a one-on-one check-in, maybe you can do that just over the phone. But if it's maybe a bigger group meeting, it makes a lot of sense to have folks on camera, because then you can see when someone's trying to talk, or when, all the things that you can't quite get to when you're not looking at anyone. But I think for those one-on-one check-ins, I've had a lot of success doing just a phone call with folks and having the agenda up in both places, because I think Zoom fatigue is real.
Well, I think that the other half of that, right, is also asking your team what their preferred communication method is, right? I think it's one thing to just like assign a standard across the board, but like, we as managers, it's in the same way that everyone learns differently, everyone communicates differently. Some people are visual people who need visual reinforcement. Other folks can communicate just as effectively orally. And so I think that it's really important to build in regular check-ins around your check-ins on, are these check-ins effective, right? Like, stop and audit your program. Like, are the systems and norms that we've created actually helping us achieve our goals? Just because you have set a standard or a rule does not mean it can't change, right? If we've learned anything, and I hope that we're learning in progressive politics, is that we have to be willing to adapt. And the more we stick to old norms and try to hold ourselves to certain expectations, the more limitations we set for ourselves. So I think a really great example, actually, and it ties into this question, is I was having a conversation with someone about how the 9-to-5 working structure, when we try to pose that in remote work, doesn't really work for everyone. Particularly people who are neurodivergent have a much harder time dedicating set time parameters around accomplishing a task or staying focused on one individual task. And so creating flexibility and expectations of, hey, here are the goals for when a due date on a project is due. How you accomplish it, I'm going to leave to you into your most effective way, and I'll check in according to the agreed upon check-in method that works for both of us. Right? Like, that's how you create systems that lift people up and create more productivity, as opposed to putting parameters for check-ins that actually slow progress, I think.
Absolutely. Melinda, do you want to chime in there on any? What changes have you all been able to make? Maybe you'll just shift a little bit to,
Could you repeat that question, Lola?
What changes have you all been able to make for your team? As a growing remote team.
Yeah. So first of all, you should absolutely be doing quarterly meeting audits, as the person who isn't enforcing quarterly meeting audits but has it on her goal. Lola's developable team actually has a really great tool. So I swear she did not that, but I've literally been using it with my team for the last 2 weeks, being like, yeah, sounds like you need to use this tool. But yeah, I would say it's definitely been, and we've shifted not only because we've gone fully remote since everything went into lockdown last March, but also we've brought in new managers and had shifts in our organizational structure. So it's leaving it a little bit to managers. I lean video chat heavy because for me, I personally need to see people's faces and expressions and to see that they are physically okay, to feel comfortable and that things are in good shape. But we have some managers who aren't that way and have been, really rigorous about trying to cut out as many extraneous meetings as they can and doing check-ins, like morning check-ins on Slack and morning checkouts, and all of that's fine as long as they're, I get right, same thing with meeting, as long as it's being used and actively engaged in serving the goal that you're setting, it's all good. But yeah, when I've talked to managers about changing up their meeting structure, we talk through what are you losing by going off video? What are you gaining? And what are your goals here? As long as you're always revisiting your goals and making sure whatever you're doing is getting you towards your goals, that's all you got to do.
I love it. I loved what you said about just being willing to adapt. And I think we, in the 12 months ago, 18 months ago, we went through a huge, okay, got to shift and adapt, but let's not fall into new patterns. Let's keep seeing okay, what do we need now? All right, what do we need now? And that's an okay thing. I want to sort of combine a couple of topics that I saw in the chats here about managing people who are either new managers or are managing volunteers or not the formal direct management relationship, and how do you sort of foster doing manager things in a less formal setting? Because for some, this is actually and maybe we all had that experience too. Our first foray into management was not in a purely formal supervisorial, I can't say that word, relationship. So what have you seen? What have you experienced? How are you thinking about fostering that development of people to become good managers in these opportunities? I'm sort of shifting some of the questions there. How do we help create the next generation of great managers? What do they need?
What I think a lot about is that some of the tactics of being a manager I use in everyday life, I feel like they don't really change from conversation to conversation. If you want to get something out of a conversation, you know what the goal is of that conversation. You go in maybe with a plan. If this is with my mom, if this is with my grandma, trying to get her to do something, I feel like a lot of the same principles apply whether you are in a formal management role or if you're just trying to move people from one place to the other without that management role. And so I would say a culmination of all the things that we said can be used, and all the things in the chat can be used in any role that you have, even if you're not, a formal manager, or if you are a volunteer or lead volunteer. I think all the same things apply. Even with kids, well, we're taught managing a child. I feel like some of the same principles apply to all of the spaces where you might be in a leadership position.
Yeah, I find some of my best management advice comes from parenting advice places, not necessarily vice versa, but in that direction. So that's my cheat sheet if anyone wants to know where I get my stuff. Yeah. Melinda, Justin, what do you want to add? What makes great managers?
Training. You should train them. It's a skill. And I think in terms of thinking about what are the ways you can identify people who might have those skills they need to move up. One thing that we did with Develop Well was work on a competencies matrix, and instead of treating management as a singular skill, we worked on they broke it out into I think 6 to 7 competencies, and what are the competencies we specifically expect from managers? So are you looking for someone who's really good at giving feedback? Are you looking for someone who's a really strong communicator, someone who understands mentorship, relationships? What are those things? And then really drill drilling down into those specific skills, those competencies, right? Like somebody who's really good at giving feedback, somebody who understands how to give feedback is probably managing up pretty well, right? So looking for those skills in the way somebody manages up, perhaps in the way they mentor interns. But yeah, getting specific about the behaviors it is that you're looking for and then screening for those.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Melinda said, keep training, but also like we as managers keep learning, like, right? Like that's things like the fact that there are people in this chat right now who are like, listening to a panel on management. Like, even if you're a seasoned manager, you should keep learning and keep growing, because you will never you'll never run into experiences that you weren't prepared for. That's just like the way worlds works. And so the more tools you have in your tool belt to respond to the custom needs of your team, the better off everyone's going to be. And I think particularly the other big piece is I like to talk about accessibility, not just as based off of ability, but also is the information you're communicating accessible to people at all levels. The systems you build should be accessible, and then you customize them to the needs of the individual. But if you don't write to the widest audience, you're not going to be able to set everyone up for the same level of success.
Snaps to that. Yeah. Well, we want to close out this session by just giving everyone in the chat and everyone who's here a huge thank you for spending an hour of your day with us talking about management. It's literally what I love talking about every single day, all day long. And I love it when there's other like-minded folks who are like, let's talk about it. And again, like Justin just said, constantly hearing and learning about how people are approaching it, doing different things, trying different advice, getting excited about things. And so one of the ways that we wanted to end this panel today was to share with you, just to say goodbye and like how you can find us all, and a little quote or inspiration that we all have about management. So I'll go first in case y'all are still thinking it up, but we had a good one. So mine is that I like to say that there's no cookie cutters. We're all special snowflakes. And that's because everyone actually is totally different and unique and needs to be thought and treated that way, in that special snowflake way. I'm turning the tide on the special snowflake. Yeah. That's, I know, Ruby.
Really, Lola reclaiming the special snowflake.
I was going to say the
same people. Yes. No cookie cutters here. No cookie cutters. So.
I'll go next. Thank you all for being here and listening to us. And thank you, Netroots, for having us. But so mine is a little less, I guess, special. But I recently watched A Bug's Life. A quote from A Bug's Life was, the first rule of leadership is everything is your fault. I'll pass it to Justin.
I love that one so much, and it's just like so honest and true. My quote, well, first of all, thank you to everyone. Love the questions. Well, you should tweet at any and all of us after the fact, so that way you guys can ask those questions later. My quote, I recently learned from a regional organizing director here in Arizona, and I'm obsessed with it, and I can't wait to print it out and put it on my wall when I have an office again. It is that culture is inevitable, but good culture is intentional. And I think about that now on the daily, and I'm not going to stop thinking about it for years, I'm sure. And I'll kick it to Melinda.
I really don't like following Justin because he says the smartest things. Not fair. He's too good on Twitter. He's too good on panels. I don't think it'll be a shock that my quote is from Brene Brown. My team has become a little, they know me as the Brene Brown lady, and that if they like bring a Brene concept to me, I will be very amenable. But last summer she said, one of the things she said was, I'm not here to be right. I'm here to get it right. And for me, that's really important in, the context of like life, right, all the time. But, when staff brings things to my attention that like I didn't really think about, or areas for growth that I need to work on, right? Like, again, as Justin said, like being a good manager is a learning experience. I do not know everything there is to know, even after 11 years in this business. There is still a lot to learn. And so, yeah, I'm not here to be right. I definitely don't have all the answers. I'm just here to get it right, at least as often as I can.
Keep trying.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you everyone for an awesome panel. We hope you have a great day. Adam Bone and I will shout out to go to pub quiz tonight. It'll be super fun. My husband is going to be nerding out at it while I try to wrangle my kids, so that'll be fun. But yeah, have a great day. Thank you, Netroots, for having us. We love you and hope to see you all in person for real hugs soon. But stay safe. All right. Bye.
Thanks.